The hostages were so close to safety. They did everything exactly right. This was not the fog of war, as I and others initially assumed it would be. Instead, the IDF confirming the hostages were wearing no shirts, trying to show that they didn't have explosives on them. They held up a makeshift white flag. And maybe the worst part is that after the first two were shot, the third escaped, yelled for help in Hebrew, and tried to explain who he was. The commander apparently called for the soldiers to cease firing, and he still got killed. So there were multiple points of failure here. And look, we talked about this last night. When I say it's not the fog of war, everything obviously happening on the ground is something in the fog of war, but this was not going door to door, for example. These are people who were coming at them with no shirts on. The IDF itself concedes the soldiers on the ground violated protocol, but this incident is making even those who completely support Israel's right to respond to the Hamas atrocities question the IDF's assurances that they're doing everything possible to get the hostages and everything possible to avoid civilian deaths more broadly. The families of those killed, understandably furious, and so is much of the Israeli public now. Hostage negotiation talks brokered by the U.S. and Qatar, among others, restarted on Monday, but Hamas today probably realizing the political pressure the Netanyahu government is now facing as a result of this, saying they refuse to release any more hostages.
We affirm our position of categorically rejecting to hold any form of negotiations over prisoners exchange under the continuing Israeli genocidal war. We are, however, open to any initiatives that contributes to ending the aggression on our people.
You got to love the fact that he's calling these hostages prisoners, right? Hamas are terrorists. They need to be eradicated. But I'm concerned by this incident. As I said, in the days immediately after the attack, support for Israel on the world stage will decline as the war drags on and civilian deaths mount. And this is the worst possible example of that. What could have been a heroic moment where Israel brought home 3 hostages, now a huge step backwards, providing seeds of doubt for even the most staunch Israel supporters. Now, let me be clear. That does not mean a ceasefire is appropriate right now, because that would be an outright win for Hamas. Israel must be able to root out Hamas as they hide in and fight from civilian areas on purpose. But my concern is that the details surrounding this incident suggest it has likely happened before with civilians, just not Israelis. And for the same reason that many support Israel, we can hold them to a higher standard. Joining me now is Tal Heinrich, spokesperson for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Thank you very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. All right, so do you think that I'm being unfair in my characterization of this event?
Thank you for having me on, Dan. This is a very, very tragic event. I was on set with you just a few weeks ago. I'm in Israel now, and I can describe to you that the atmosphere in the country following this incident is very heavily charged. And you described it well. This should not have happened. It's the worst scenario that Israelis could have imagined. And it happened. These 3 hostages were somehow identified as a threat by our forces and were shot at. And as you said, they did everything that they could have thought of not to appear as a threat to our forces, and nevertheless they were, and they paid with their lives. Now, we are drawing very important lessons. We're still investigating, by the way, this incident. The IDF chief of staff himself has been involved, and when he spoke to soldiers just yesterday and 2 days ago, he said unequivocally that the rules of engagement were not followed in this incident, and that, for instance, it doesn't matter, as you said, if they were Palestinian civilians or Israeli hostages, for that matter, they should not have been shot at. They raised a white flag. Now, you have to also bring into account the scenery in which this incident took place. This is the Shaja'iyah neighborhood in the Gaza Strip. In Gaza, it's in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. It's a very, very complex battle zone. I think maybe the most complex one. Also in 2014, we lost soldiers there. And a day before, just before that incident happened, and after that incident happened, we had encounters between our forces and terrorists. It's full of ambushes, of fatal encounters and traps. The Hamas terrorists, they're playing sounds in Hebrew to try to lure in our soldiers. So it's a very, very complex situation.
Look, thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.